Hello, my name is Chin Banerjee. On behalf of SANSAD, I have the greatest pleasure in welcoming you to this event on India, on the current situation in India, which, as you have seen from our notice, is indeed extremely serious. And that's why we are going to talk about it, explore the issues, and I hope you will contribute and participate in the discussion that follows. Welcome again, and thank you very much for coming, because it is a lovely day and there was a marathon and all that, which you could have been running. So you have come here instead to talk about and hear about the situation in India. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to Dionne to take over.
Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Chin, and everyone at SANSAD for organizing this event. Just want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam First Nations. And we are honored to be here to talk about an issue that is of importance to South Asians. We're here today to talk about the Indian elections that are underway. And as you probably heard and read all the hype about, India being the biggest democracy in the world, and, the election is spread over 5 weeks. So many, about 900 million voters. Way more than the population of many countries. There's a lot of kind of bravado over this great democracy that we have. And I think today we're going to unpack some of the hype that has been created about this and really examine whether India is true, how much of a democracy is India today. And what would be the fate of democracy, after the results of this election. And we have some very respected experts in their fields here today. We're honored to have Navsharan here from India, and Harsh and Lubna, and I'm just going to introduce them. Navsharan is a women's rights and human rights activist in New Delhi. She has been involved in the women's movement in India and in several human rights movements. She's traveled across India and spoken to, the victims of several human rights abuses, whether it's in Gujarat, Kashmir, all over India, basically, especially given the rise of the extreme right wing in India today. And the human rights abuses that have been perpetrated in the name of patriotism and nationalism. She has been a core member of her father, Bhaiji Gurcharan Singh's Amritsar School of Drama. And she is the co-editor of a book called Landscapes of Fear, Understanding Impunity. She's traveled across India with the human rights caravan Karwan-e-Mohabbat to visit families of the victims of lynchings. Another book that's been brought out by Navsharan is this called Blood Censored, When Kashmiris Become the Enemy. So I think this is available online if anyone is interested in ordering a copy. Our next speaker is Lubna Yusuf Moosa, who teaches journalism at the Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Surrey. She's the recipient of the Navchetna Award for being the first Muslim woman to receive a PhD in communication and journalism from the University of Mumbai. She worked for the University of Mumbai as an assistant professor and served as a reporter for All India Radio before moving to India. She has reported for various beats and provided voice casts for national news bulletins. She's active in community service and volunteers for Options Community Services. And our final speaker will be Harsh Trivedi. He's a final year undergraduate. Oh, he's just graduated. Congratulations. In political science and philosophy from the University of British Columbia. And he writes a blog on Indian affairs and is a member of the board of SANSAD. He's concerned with issues of socialism, authoritarianism, and indigenous rights in India. So give me a big hand in welcoming our panelists today. So I'll start by asking Navsharan to speak, and then Lubna and Harsh.
Thanks, Dionne, and thanks to SANSAD for organizing this, giving me an opportunity to share some of the issues we've been struggling with for the last few years. Not ever since Mr. Modi formed the government, before also, but things changed in the last few years. I've been here. I came here 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago, the day a junior member of the Supreme Court went public stating that she'd been sexually harassed by none other than the Chief Justice of India. And she went public, and boy, country was split. There were Chief Justice and brother judges who said this was a ploy to destabilize India, to malign the judiciary, and women's groups saying, please follow the due process, and women's bodies should not be inscribed with, nation stability should not be inscribed on women's bodies, but there is a major split because it's the Chief Justice of India. So I must admit, we are living in a state of moral confusion and an upheaval of some kinds, and also very, very unsettling times. I'm really grateful to all of you to have come here, because what we've been fighting in India for the last few years is not an easy battle. We are up against hypernationalism, which has been thrown at us by Mr. Modi and the right-wing, the entire right-wing agenda, which is a hypernationalism which is aggressive and exclusionary, which is which is an ideology which has criminalized left and liberal dissent, which has normalized hatred against minorities, especially Muslims and somewhat Christians and Dalits. It's a hyper-nationalism which is belligerently favors militarism. And if some of you find, who watch TV here and find Mr. Trump's sayings as crass, you could only imagine what we hear on Indian TV on a daily basis, where the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, the External Affairs Ministers, they come on TV and say, we have atom bomb and we've not kept it to burst it on Diwali. Mr. Modi has said it on TV that we have an atom bomb. We've been hearing how they've been saying that we will beat the enemy out, we will raise their houses to grounds, and whose? We know there's an external enemy which has been created, which is Pakistan. There's an internal enemy, which is Muslims and Dalits and minorities. And anyone who speaks, who asks even a small question, is intimidated, is gagged, and criminalized. So even if you ask this question, there was an attack that happened on Indian soldiers, about 42, Pulwama, 42 soldiers died, and there was the muscular politics kicked in, and there was this entire discourse of we will go kill them, and then a bomb was dropped in Pakistan, in Balakot, and as soon as the bomb was dropped, which many people said was dropped in a forest area, but our political leadership was quick to come on TV to say 350 people were killed, militants were killed in Balakot. And when some people asked just this plain question, how did you count them? And how did you come at this figure of 350? We were all told we were anti-nationals, we should go to Pakistan, we have no place in India, and we should just leave. We are anti-nationals. And mobs were let loose on people who ask questions. And there have been incidents all over India, and I've heard also in Canada where some people tried to object to blood for blood kind of talk. So, in addition to what's happening in terms of intimidating dissent or gagging people, there's also frenzied attacks which are being carried out against Muslims. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about those because it all started right after when the new government was sworn in 2014. There was one person, Muhammad Akhlaq, who was attacked by a mob while he was sitting in his own house a few kilometers away from New Delhi. And the mob attacked Muhammad Akhlaq on the suspicion that he has beef in his fridge. He was killed. His son was badly attacked, and he's still living in a vegetated state. There was a second attack which happened shortly after of a person, Pehlu Khan, who was killed by the mob in broad daylight, and as he was taking cows which he had bought from an animal fair, 2 cows for 80,000 rupees, and he was attacked by the mob saying that you were buying these cows to kill them for beef. And then there was a third attack on a young boy, all of 17, who had just completed his traditional education and had become a hafiz, which means that he knew now how to say the Quran without reading it. And his village people, in appreciation, gave him 2,000 rupees. With 2,000 rupees, he went to Delhi's Chandni Chowk to buy clothes to do his Eid shopping. And as he was returning on a local train, he was killed by the mob because he had a skull cap and he looked visibly Muslim. And these were the mobs which were attacking. And some of us who were reading the newspapers, who were looking at news, which were only trickling in, they will be there for a day and then there'll be a gag order and nothing, and then trying to make sense of what is happening. There's a human rights and social activist, a Gandhian person. His name is Harsh Mandar. Some of us have, I've been working with him before also. We decided to go to Hafiz Junaid's house just to meet the family to see what was happening. We realized that the family was living in fear. There was nobody, there was no cases had been registered. The police was only harassing them. And the family was suffering in isolation. At this, then Harsh Mandar gave a call to people, civil society in Delhi, saying that it's hatred, and hatred cannot be fought with hatred. It can only be helped with love. So he gave a call to form a caravan of love, which is called Karwan-e-Mohabbat. I became a member of the caravan, and from September 2017 to March 2019, some of us on the caravan, we visited 14 states, 28 places where mobs had lynched Muslim people on the grounds, on the suspicion of either carrying beef or trafficking in cows, or what they call love jihad, that you Muslims are actually attacking Hindu women by luring them in love affairs and then converting them. And it's been called love jihad, which Muslims have, as they have done other jihads. This is another way of attacking the fabric of Hinduism. So in all these journeys that 2.5 years that we took, we saw that there was a pattern. There was a very clear pattern in how the mobs lynched people. These were not mobs. These were very organized attacks. They were organized, they were synchronized, and often with a call from the local temple. These were not mobs, but organized gangs of belonging to a very specific ideology. We looked at who formed these crowds, and we knew these were not crowds. If there were crowds, there will be people from, at least a few people from different viewpoint also, but these were crowds which were completely one in terms of their hatred for Muslims. We also saw that what many people were dismissing as, oh, these were spontaneous mobs which came together because cow is so sacred to us, because we have an ancient civilization where cows were always worshipped as mothers, and the crowds cannot actually see that someone is killing or someone is smuggling the cows. Actually, these were mobs which had been brought together. They were not becoming strong because they were spontaneous. They were becoming strong because the institutions which limit the power of vigilante was becoming very, very weak. We saw institution after institution after institution crumbling under the weight of muscular politics, under the weight of 56 inches chest, which Mr. Modi flaunts every time. And we saw that the police, the judiciary, the media, they were all ganged up against the victims. There were no justice. All the people, almost entire 278 attacks have happened according to the latest India spend figures. Everywhere there are only very few FIRs which have been registered against the perpetrators, even when their names were known. Because Pahlu Khan, for instance, when he died, before he died, in his dying declaration, he named 6 people, the names he heard from as they were attacking him. And he gave those names, but all 6 people have been, they are out on bails. And on the other hand, Pahlu Khan's 2 sons, who were accompanying him as he bought the cows and bringing them home, they are now facing a charge of cow smuggling. Everywhere else, there are people who told us that how their sons were killed. They did not want to pursue the cases because they are too scared. We met a person whose son was killed. He brought the body home and buried the body. 2 days later, police came and said, oh, this thing is reported in the media. We will have to break open the grave and we're going to do a post-mortem on your son. He said he hated it because this was making his son die twice. So the grave was uprooted. His son was taken to the hospital. A post-mortem was done. And then the body was brought back to the house and he buried him again. When we went there, we asked him, what would you like us to do? Is there anything that we can do for you? And he said, no, nothing. And we again asked, we said, anything. And he said, you will go to heaven if you bring me my son's post-mortem report. And we said, but that you should get it anyways? And he said, no, my other two sons have been following up with the police for the post-mortem report because I want to see how my son, what they write in the report, how my son was killed. But when my sons kept going there, and later on they were told, if you come again, we are going to slap a case on you. And so I stopped my sons. So if you get us the post-mortem report, you will go to heaven. And we said, but why did you stop doing it? He said, we have endured. We have, and the Urdu word they used was, humne sabr kar liya. We have endured. We are not going to pursue any cases. So which is very much the case for the entire Muslim people, that they have now agreed that they are second-rate citizens in this country, which promised at the time of when the new state was formed after 1947, that every citizen of this country will have equal right, no matter what caste, no matter what religion. That promise is completely broken. Without even changing the constitution, Mr. Modi and his this new dispensation has been successful in creating a second-class citizenship for Muslim people, and they are saying it openly. In the election campaign now, they are saying, we are going to reduce them to second-rate citizenship so that they don't, their right to vote is also revoked, and no political party then goes to them to appease them, and we will reduce them to the second-rate citizens, as our Hindu brothers and sisters have been reduced to in Pakistan. So they are invoking now that what has happened in Pakistan will be repeated in India, despite the... So another thing about we are often... It's often said that violence is not new to India. We've seen in 47 when 1 million people were killed. We saw that right after independence, and some 15 years later, the first Jabalpur riot happened in late 60s. Then there was a big riot that happened in Nellie in Assam in 83. In 84, anti-Sikh pogrom happened. Then 87 in Hashimpura, 88 in Bhagalpur, 2002 in Gujarat, 2015 in Muzaffar Nagar. While hate violence is not new to India, it is said. So lynching is one of the same continuum, but it is not the same. All the earlier riots, the so-called communal riots, had a geography and had a time period. They were concentrated in an area, had a start date, and howsoever long, there was an end date also. But now what is happening is across India, from Nellie to Tamil Nadu, to Karnataka, to Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Bihar, there is Rajasthan, there is Haryana, no place which is left. And the message is very clear that you are safe nowhere. It's cutting across the entire country. So that's what has happened to Muslim community in India, that they have been now reduced to where hate is institutionalized and fear is normalized. One last thing about these hate attacks is that all these attacks have been videographed. All the attacks where lynchings have happened, we have photographs which we've seen. I have photographs on my phone. There are videos which are made of when these attacks are happening, when the people are being killed, and then they are circulated widely. Nobody ever tries to hide the face, because these are trophies, because they know that they are going to be not punished but rewarded for what they have done. So in this larger context, the other where Muslims back both economic, because in a lot of the regions where these attacks have happened, Muslims are traditionally involved in meat trade and also in cow rearing. And they have their economic back has been broken. On the other hand, there are also Dalits who are being attacked. Dalits, the first attack, and again Dalit attacks have also also been happening before, but what is happening now has a different dimension. The first major attack happened in 2017 in Western UP, in Shabirpur, where Dalits of Ravidas caste, 60 houses in a village where Shabirpur, they wanted in their temple a statue of Bhimrao Ambedkar installed. They got the statue made, they collected money, they told us 20,000 rupees. They got a small statue which is all of 5 feet, and they brought it from Jaipur where it was done. And as they tried to install it in their temple, inside the temple, they constructed a small platform from where the statue was going to be put. It was a classic Ambedkar statue where Ambedkar has the Constitution of India under one arm and his index finger pointing to horizon, where he's telling his people, go seek education and future will be yours. When they tried to install the statue, the Rajputs who had, Mr. Adityanath, who also belongs to Rajput caste, his government had been sworn in UP. The Rajputs of that area said, you cannot have that statue installed and you can't have this person pointing fingers at us. Our people, when they pass through this road, we wouldn't like someone to be pointing a finger at us. So bring this statue down, turn the face to the other side, or you are not allowed to do that. Ravidas people said, no, this is our temple, this is our land, we are going to do it. They tried to go to the magistrate, they tried to use the administrative route, nothing worked. When they still tried to install the statue, all hell broke loose. They were attacked, the entire Dalit hamlet was attacked. All 60 houses of Dalits were burnt down. There were people arrested. The temple was desecrated. The arm of Ambedkar was broken where the index finger is raising. And a lot of people, including Chandrasekhar Ravan, who's now the youth Dalit leader, was also arrested in this incident. After this, Dalits of that place, Shabirpur, they collected all the Hindu symbols that they had in their homes, lockets and calendars or small statues. They took all of this together and drowned it in the village pond, and they said, we are no longer Hindus. They denounced Hinduism. They all became Buddhist, and when we visited them the second time, they said, we are proud Buddhist. We are no longer Hindus, and we are not the army of the Hindutva which is being constructed. This was the first incident, and then we know Bhima Koregaon happened. Koregaon, very briefly, since I have 4 minutes. Okay. They were in 1818, 200 years ago, in Anglo-Maratha war in Maharashtra. Dalit who were of Mahar castes fought with British to defeat the Peshwa army in that region, the Marathwada region, where Peshwas, the high caste rulers, were ruling, who were known for their very casteist or Brahminical hierarchical rule, and who had been oppressing the scheduled caste, especially the Mahars of that area. This war happened in 1818, when British army then defeated the Peshwas, and also constructed a pillar there with the names of about 45 Mahar soldiers who were also killed in this war. And since then, it had become a little bit of a place where Dalits go and think that their people had sacrificed their lives to defeat the casteist, the Brahminical regime of Peshwas. there are different interpretations in history. Some people, including the Dalit scholar Anand Tiltombre, has been saying that this was something very different. Mahars were in that army because there was a job. So whatever, we are not going into that controversy. But now, with rise of Brahminical aggression in that area, Dalits in that area decided to reclaim that history and wage a war against the modern, the new Peshwai. And they decided to mark the 200 years of Koregaon battle by calling a big meeting, a sabha, Elgar Parishad, in Pune on the anniversary of, which was January 1st, 2018. They called a meeting. Thousands and thousands of Dalits reached there, and they pledged to fight against their oppression. There was a large meeting, and everybody, Dalits, felt very emboldened by the fact that they could collect in that number against the Peshwai. Hindu Sangathanas, several of them working in that area, called it an anti-national meeting. They said that 1880 battle was, these were traitors, anti-nationals, although there was no nation, no state in 1818. They said that these were people who fought with British to defeat indigenous people, and therefore they are traitors, therefore they are anti-nationals, and those who are collecting these are also anti-nationals. So they brought a big army to disrupt the meeting. The meeting was disrupted. People were killed, arrested. But the police arrested 2 leaders of the Brahmin people who were opposing this congregation, and arrested them for causing, for burning buses, for letting loose violence. And these 2 people were, although there was a big charge sheet against them, they were released on bail very soon. But only weeks after, India's best human rights defenders, public intellectuals, 10 of them were arrested on the grounds that they incited Dalit violence in Koregaon, in Pune. And these were prominent among them, Sudha Bhardwaj, who's a human rights lawyer who's been working in Chhattisgarh, who's an IIT India graduate, a person who did her PhD in Harvard and then went back to live with people in Chhattisgarh because she knew that there is no justice. The people, Adivasi people, cannot fight for justice in their own land, to protect their own land and protect their own rights. So she's been fighting with them. There is Surendra Gadgil, who's another lawyer who was arrested. He also happens to be the lawyer of G.N. Sai Baba, another person, a professor of Delhi University, who was arrested in 2014 on charges of being a Maoist. There is Varavara Rao, the poet, who was arrested. There is Rona Wilson, who's arrested, who's a civil rights activist and who has been, he's the general secretary of a coalition which is formed to protect the rights of political prisoners. There is Arun Ferreira, there is Gautam Navlakha. So all 10 best well-known public intellectuals who were arrested under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, India's most repressive black law, UAPA, and UAPA was slapped on them. This is also a turning point in India's history where dissent, where your right to speak, only to be able to say that we do not agree with you, we do not agree with what is happening, we stand for justice, and we claim the right to ask questions. They are arrested. It's a turning point because it has criminalized their legal defense for rights of rights, which are constitutional rights, that has been criminalized. There is also similarly a doctrine, which is the security doctrine, which has been introduced, whereby normal policing doesn't happen in India anymore. There is military, there is paramilitary, there are vigilante, and they work together. Vigilante groups have work their ways into state processes. State is completely, what they are doing is completely illegal but legitimate, because it also conforms to the ideology to which the present government actually holds itself accountable. So all of this is happening, just to conclude, two areas. One, where Muslims have been created as the other, the enemy. They are being lynched. There is a total divide. Mr. Modi's government has been able to generate this consensus that they are outsiders and they need to be fought and they need to be shown their place. On the other hand, those who ask any question are criminalized and their dissent is completely muffled. So we are in a stage where there is a deep economic crisis. India has never been this unequal. If India has not seen this kind of hatred, India has never been this unequal either. In 1 year, 2017-18, India added 17 new billionaires to the list, and the list is now 101. And the entire wealth which was generated in 2017-18 went to 1% upper Indians, and rest of the 6,070 million people got 1% share in the increase in wealth. There is close to 7% unemployment rate. There are 78% Indian households without any regular income-making member. These are all government figures. We have a situation where in 20 years, from 1995 to 2015, 300,000 farmers have killed themselves because India is reeling under an unprecedented agrarian crisis. And this is only a tip of the iceberg, because figures had been mounting, and 2015 government decided to stop publishing the data on farmer suicides. This comes to 42 suicides per day. So there is a crisis. There is a crisis where a large number, a majority of Indian working people are reeling under economic crisis, and on top of it, they are divided. There is an attempt to divide them on the lines of caste and religion. If India, many people say that it's a crisis moment for democracy, and I say it's not a crisis moment for Indian democracy, it's a challenge for Indian people. Indian people have never been under such attack before. 1975 emergency happened, yes, but after that, this is the biggest challenge for Indian people, how to stay, how to be able to protect, and it's a challenge for us also, how to make sense and how to convey to people that people are suffering because of the policies, the crisis of accumulation, which has reached this level. And I can go on giving you more figures, but the crisis is so large at the moment that there are no jobs. There are no jobs, and yet we have crowds which are going around blaming Muslims, blaming Dalits for the crisis that has been created. And that's the success of the right-wing ideology. But to end on a note that if India was never divided like this, India was never united like this also. We've seen in the last few years, at least last 2 years, large mobilizations of youth, of women who've been coming out every few days in every city, claiming the rights. We've never seen lakhs of farmers coming to Delhi, seeking accountability, seeking the truth of farmer suicides. We are seeking several truths, and we are seeking justice. And although we are in for a long haul, I think we are also giving this ultranationalism a big fight also. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navsharan, for describing the state of terror that exists in India today, thanks to the Hindu right-wing forces. And as you may have all read that it's a very organized force that has kind of unleashed terror amongst in all Indians. Not only Muslims are the target, but people who are concerned about the way in which ordinary people are targeted are also very concerned. And there's a lot of propaganda that's used to create this whole atmosphere of terror, and people who actually speak out are silenced. And Lubna is going to talk more about the journalists who are being silenced in India today.
All right. Yep.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm pretty loud, I guess. Nonetheless, if towards me, is that fine? Yep. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Lubna, and I would like to start from where Navsharan actually was pretty much pointing out all through her presentation, is that people are intimidated. This morning I got a call from my mother and she's like, whoa, don't you talk anything against the government? I'm like, okay. So this is the fear that is being instilled in the minds of the people, even today, even at this day. So I'll be talking about basically, since I've been associated with journalism for quite a long time, I actually had a PowerPoint presentation. I'm an instructor, so we go by PPTs. Unfortunately, we don't have it out here. But I would just like to start by just asking a small question. Do you guys know who she is? Yes? Who is she? Thank you so very much. She is Gauri Lankesh, or should I say she was Gauri Lankesh. She was killed. And at 8 p.m. on the evening of September 5, 2017, Gauri Lankesh, an editor of Gauri Lankesh Patrike, she was entering her home where these assassins came on a motorbike. They shot 3 bullets right into her heart and lungs that were damaged, and she was pronounced dead. Now, why was she killed? The reason is as simple as it can be. She was an outspoken left-wing journalist, and unfortunately, she was working in the time, and especially working in an India that is considered as most dangerous for reporters. Now, if for those who didn't agree with me by the strong statement that India is not considered safe for the reporters, I do have statistics to prove my point. However, as it has been pointed out, it is not just the ruling BJP government or BJP party, but there are as many as 30 loosely affiliated organizations who endorse this virulent brand of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism. And these guys engage into one of the most heinous activities that probably we never heard of. Believe me, a commoner never ever heard of lynching before lynching took place. Lynching was something that came across as a new word for most of us. And that's when it not only came as a new word in our dictionary, it started becoming something that people started using as an everyday vocabulary. You hear lynching every single day. That's how it happened. It was not only lynching, but they had range of other heinous activities that they were engaging in, like riots, bomb blasts, threats of rapes, incarceration. That is something that you pretty much pointed out, how people are being, it is not just, there was time where, if you are a journalist, you have something bad written about someone, something that goes against someone, it would just stay at defamation. But now they were getting into more legal, and as you said, certain laws that are considered as the black laws of India. So people were booked under those laws. And why? They were harassing people just because they were critical of them and their sectarian idea. What is more unfortunate is not just the fact that people were talking about. It was the way people were coming out out and about with it. There was always hatred, thanks to the divide and rule, theory of the company, but then there was always this hatred that was in the minds of the people that they buried in their hearts. But people became more vocal. Like when Gauri Lankesh was killed, people just came out and about with it, not sympathizing with her. But they said that, you know what, she was a Naxal sympathizer. Whatever happened to her, good for her. That's how people came out with it. So the unfortunate thing is, people started using media to an extent that they would just be, they would just spread across the hatred that they had in their hearts. People did have hatred, but did not come out open the way they did after 2014. So times have been pretty tough for journalists, and they are finding it difficult to do their jobs. The fact that they are being bullied, the reason why I'm using the word bullied, the way the maturity level of these guys is as small as a high schooler. I mean, if you do something wrong, in the way in schools, you just bash the person off. That's how it is. That's how the entire in our so-called democratic nation, as she said, is how democratic is India. I mean, that's how you deal with people. That's how people are being dealt with. So it's not only filing defamation cases against them, just slapping defamation cases. They are going to an extent that they are filing sedition cases against journalists. Now, who used sedition? It was used during the British rule to silence freedom fighters. Now you make the connection. It was used by Britishers to silence the freedom fighters. It has been used by the ruling government to silence the journalist. So India, if you look at the statistics, I said I would be providing you stats. So if you look at statistics, according to World Press Freedom Index, India fell to 136 spot amongst the fact that, how free and a journalist is in a country. Out of 180 countries, India fell to 136 spot in 2017. It was below Afghanistan and Burma, believe me. If this figure is pretty much, surprising to you, in 2018, it fell 2 more spots below. It came to 138th spot. Basically adding its fears that journalists are increasingly the targets of online smear campaigns by the most radical nationalists who vilify them and even threaten the physical reprisals. This is not enough. This is not only talking about how free a journalist is. A journalist is being attacked more after 2014. If you look at the figures, according to Committee to Protect Journalists, these guys come up with the research and they have come up with the data. They said in past 27 years, that is from 1992 to 2019, 50 journalists have been killed. Can you imagine how many were killed from 2014 to 2019? The figure is as big as 14 journalists were killed. And these people also try to find out the reasons behind it. So they weren't on some dangerous assignment or it was a crossfire or a combat. 12 of them were killed because of the work that they did. It was complete impunity was the entire motive behind the murders that took place. There were as many as 12 journalists who were killed. Gauri Lankesh was one of them, the one that we mentioned. And the Global Impunity Index of 2018, the ones that they tried to calculate the number of unsolved journalist murders. So in that, India stands 15. I mean, that's how high is the rate of unsolved cases. So journalists are being killed. They know who the perpetrators are. And again, I mean, as Navsharan said, that all of these were somewhere down the line traced to the right-wing organizations. It was either Sanatan guys who killed Narendra Dabholkar. They were also the ones amongst the Gauri Lankesh's murder. They were the ones that were behind it. So there have been a lot of organizations that have been associated, that have been linked to the right-wing ideology. Unfortunately, what was observed by CPJ, that is the Committee to Protect Journalists, they've observed that the condition has worsened over past few years. So the thing of solving the cases, it's not improved. Like if you go to see, there are countries like Colombia, it seems that the statistics show that it's been improving. The way they are dealing with the unsolved cases is improving. To an extent that Pakistan also comes under the improved list. Unfortunately, India comes amongst the worsened list. And so these journalists were killed. Why? It was just a direct retaliation for their work, for something that they reported. Most of the journalists were targeted for their reporting local corruption, crime, and politics that was outside main urban areas. So local journalists were of the main target. If you look at the 2018 scenario, there were 4 journalists who were killed. To name them, it was Naveen Nishchal of Dainik Bhaskar, Sandeep Sharma of News World, Sujat Bukhari of Rising Kashmir, and Chandan Tiwari of Aaj. If you look at the way these guys were killed, it is pretty unfortunate. In Ara, on March 25th, Naveen Nishchal and another reporter, Vijay Singh, they were run over by a car, by SUV. What was the crime? Naveen Nishchal was reporting on child marriage. Both these journalists, they died on the spot. They were on the scene. They were dead. Not only that, there was a video, as she mentioned, there's a video of people, being lynched. Similarly, there's a video of how Sandeep Sharma was killed. You had this guy who was on a motorbike. I had the video, unfortunately, as I told you, we couldn't show. And then you've got a truck that just comes and runs over him ruthlessly. The video is pretty disturbing. So Sandeep Sharma, on March 26, 2018, he was killed when a truck ran over his motorcycle. The News World Bureau Chief Vikas Purohit said that Sharma did receive threats earlier for publishing stories on illegal sand mining and police corruption and had been beaten up earlier. The third guy, it's pretty, it's something that's pretty surprising to know. This man was given police protection. He was Sujat Bukhari, a senior journalist and editor who was shot and killed on June 14 along with 2 police officers that were assigned to him for protection. So you had 2 police officers with him. They were killed. He was killed. Why? Because he was reporting on the situation of Kashmir. The fourth guy I would like to mention is Chandan Tiwari. Chandan Tiwari, he was basically the person, he was working for Hindi daily Aaj. He was abducted. On October 29, his body was found, which was badly beaten up. He died after he was on his way to the hospital, and then he was declared dead. Tiwari was targeted for exposing alleged financial irregularities. So all of these guys who were trying to work against corruption, they were trying to report crime, they were killed because they were truthful to their job. So these ruthless murders are indicative of a larger problem of silencing journalists. There is unfortunately, I know I'm running out of time. I would just like to get your attention to certain other things like the censorship that we have. So there is this non-profit thing that comes, a hoot that comes up with the figures. And they were the ones who came up with the figure that, there was around 50 instances of censorship and more than 20 instances of suspension of internet service as well as taking down of online content. Who did this? You had number of people who were doing it and who were a part of it. It was definitely the number of people who are involved in this, it would range from politicians to businessmen to members of Hindu right-wing groups to police to paramilitary forces, government agencies like Film Certification Board, Information and Broadcasting Ministry, state government lawyers, and even media groups that have acted to undermine freedom of expression. So India's record as far as freedom of press is concerned has always been poor, but it has been deteriorating in the past few years, especially post-2014. So what do? When the stories can't be killed, the storyteller is silenced. As Jamal Khashoggi in his final posthumous column argued, what the Arab world most needs is free expression. I would say his words do stand true for India as well, and for every other nation where reporters are being silenced, and oftentimes violently silenced for their courage and audacity to speak the truth. And we've got this thing where our beloved Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, calls himself as the watchman of the country. Unfortunately, the country that is being protected by the watchman, the watchdog of the society, isn't safe. So but nonetheless, there have been people who do come up and who want to fight this entire fear in the face of death, they are trying to prove a point. I would say that they are pretty much abiding by what Faiz Ahmad Faiz had written in his poem, and I would just conclude with that poem. Since I don't want to take the Urdu essence of the poem, I would first recite the 2 stanzas in Urdu and then give you English translation for people out here. So the poem by Faiz says that Bol ke lab azad hai tere, bol zaba ab tak teri hai. तेरा सुतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जाँ अब तक तेरी है. बोल ये थोड़ा वक्त बहुत है जिस्म ज़बां की मौत से पहले. बोल के सच जिंदा है अब तक, बोल जो कुछ कहना है कह दे. The translation is this way: Speak, for your lips are yet free. Speak, for your tongue is still your own. Your upright body is still yours. Speak, your life is still your own. Speak, a little time suffices before the death of body and tongue. Speak, for truth is still alive. Speak, say whatever must be said. Thank you so very much for having me here.
Thanks so much, Lubna. Now Harsh is going to speak about the encroachment on the rights of indigenous people and their lands in India.
Hi, so thanks everyone for coming here. Well, I just want to use my time to talk primarily about what is the state of indigenous rights over the last 5 years, but also maybe provide a bit of a context about what has been going on to indigenous people in the state of India since colonization, and what many have argued, and I think stands true, the fact that India has continued colonizing itself despite overthrowing the British and gaining independence. And I also, instead of focusing on getting a rundown of the atrocities that are being committed on a regular basis, as has been covered very well by the panel already, I kind of want to go more into the kind of economics and the broader social and economic dynamics that have brought us to this point. And so what I want to talk about is the consequences of the economic policies that go uncriticized, because people had to first and foremost defend their very basic rights of free speech. As has been pointed out, journalists have been getting murdered or arrested, activists have been getting arrested under the UAPA and things like that. So I think it would be better to spend my time right now focusing on the things that they wanted to bring emphasis towards, and that would be a better way to carry forward their work while they're currently imprisoned. Also, I want to bring a focus on this is because indigenous people are not just victims of hypernationalism in terms of physical violence. That is just a given. But also they are victims of a sort of enforced ignorance that goes on in the society, which is a very conscious product of this same nationalism. So in India, indigenous peoples are identified commonly as Adivasis. Since the adoption of the constitution in 1950, there's a category in it that qualifies them as scheduled tribes. So what happens is that India has kind of refused to acknowledge indigenous peoples as indigenous peoples, but instead just as distinctive tribal groups. What this has allowed them to do is that on the domestic as well as on international stage, it has kind of given them a bit of leeway to say that no, we just consider all Indians as indigenous. So when UN bodies or outside bodies want to say that indigenous rights are being violated, India can just say, well, that just doesn't work because we don't have a framework for what indigenous means separately for Adivasis. So over the last few decades, as India has liberalized its markets since the 90s, making it easier for resource extraction for domestic and foreign producers, Adivasi lands have been encroached upon repeatedly for these ends. So the dispossession that is taking place happens on the excuses of what are called development projects, but more or less what ends up actually happening is a privatization of land that goes more towards profiting businessmen. And one of the things that we can talk about, I think, is maybe later on during the discussion, if we have some time, is about what has been going on with the process regarding Vedanta mining in Tuticorin, and how last year 13 protesters were killed over there. You can look up the videos for it. Police were given protocols to follow, and that even if they want to disperse crowd, what they are supposed to do is fire in the air to give warning shots to the people, but instead you can see in the video quite directly how police were with snipers pointing directly for headshots at indigenous people. So along with the human rights violations committed by the state private actors, crimes against Adivasis are also a regular occurrence in general. There was a total of 6,568 cases of crimes against indigenous peoples reported in 2016. And that's just going by the fact that those crimes were even reported to begin with. So one of the things I want to focus on is the Forest Rights Act that was passed in 2006, and it was done so to sort of democratize the process of land dispossession, kind of give some authority to Gram Sabhas, which are basically village councils that are given the final authority in saying whether or not they want to give up their lands. And the thing is that the Supreme Court itself has in the past recognized the authority that the Act provides to the Gram Sabhas. One such example was in 2017 when the Supreme Court rejected a petition by the Odisha Mining Corporation, which was seeking to reconvene Gram Sabhas in the Niyamgiri Hills to consider a mining proposal that was already rejected by the village councils back in 2013. And what the Supreme Court said was that if that the decision was very clear, and if the mining corporation did want to continue consultation, what it would have to do was go back to the indigenous peoples and not come to the Supreme Court. So you see that there is a precedence for the Supreme Court in recognizing the power that the Act holds and the Gram Sabhas hold. But then at the same time, this is the same Supreme Court that in February of this year essentially came out with a decision saying that at least 5 to 7 million people, indigenous people, would have to be displaced from central forests in India. And what they cited over there as their sort of excuse for it, their justification for it, was saying that this was for conservation of forests. And they said that, so the court has cited conservation of forests as the rationale for this decision, which is an argument that absolutely flies against the facts, the fact that indigenous people have been, according to government data and research, shown to be living in more sustainable ways than any other people who are forest dwellers. And another problem, of course, is the fact that this, of course, must be understood in the context that the conservation groups that file these appeals are a part of this overall phenomenon of NGOs that are operating under neoliberalism in India. And the sort of, in civil society, the organizations such as NGOs that are meant to promote betterment of life conditions and empower marginal voices into the mainstream are also haunted by these specters of caste and class. And caste also, I think, is important to talk about in this context, because in most cases what has ended up happening is where the indigenous communities have become consolidated into the Hindu fold, they are considered as lower caste people. So the groups that argued in the Supreme Court for conservation said that people living in the forest were making unsustainable use of the land and contributing to deforestation. But of course, what we see is that the bigger reason behind the displacement lies once again in the economic policies of the state and its constant push towards neoliberalization. It wants to make it easier for India than it already is to become a country that can be used for raw material extraction by multinational as well as domestic corporations. Just some time after, in fact, I think 4 or 5 days after the Supreme Court decision came out, it became public that Modi had basically granted permission to the Adani Group to create a special economic zone that would be focusing on coal mining in these regions. And in this case, it is an open mining project that will destroy huge areas of forests, displace many thousands of people who depend on these lands for their daily existence. Now, so geared towards export, special economic zones are basically places where companies get a huge amounts of duty waivers, tax exemptions, faster clearances. The government decision to grant this status to the Adani project will save the company billions of rupees in taxes, estimated to be so far at least 3.2 billion rupees annually, just in terms of clean energy cess tax. And then, so what has happened is that one of the biggest hurdles to this project was the opposition that local groups were having, villages were having in these areas. And the Jharkhand government had contentiously aided the transfer of farmland for the Adani project by declaring that the project actually served public purpose and overlooked the objections of local residents during the mandatory social impact assessment hearings. And because it is an SEZ, they're also not required to do environmental consultations at all. They just have a free run over whatever land they're provided. They don't need to consult the fact that, open mining will leave basically a scar on the face of the earth that just will be completely unproductive or, will not be able to turn back into forest later on. So now, I mean, since I'm running out of a bit of a time, what I also want to focus on is just how they have also tried to, there's been a draft that has circulated recently by the central government to amend the Indian Forest Act. Now, this is an act that is separate from the Forest Rights Act. The Indian Forest Act was actually a colonial administration thing. It was enacted in 1927 for the British to basically take lumber from Indian forests and oppress indigenous peoples in their own way. So the reason I bring this up is that the recent draft that the BJP government made has basically that they're using it to propose a way to poke holes in the protections provided by the Forest Rights Act. In the draft law to replace the Colonial Era Act, the Union government has proposed to not only retain but enhance policing and quasi-judicial powers that the forest officials enjoyed under the original act and provide them yet more. It includes powers to use firearms with exceptional levels of immunity from prosecution. And the draft act, prepared by the Union government providing these exceptional powers, has been shared with state governments for consultation, and these consultations are supposed to be completed by June 7th, which is a month before the Supreme Court sits again to hear on the case of displacing 5 to 7 million people. So I think it'll be very important to look at how states respond to this act, no matter who comes into power after these elections, in terms of contributing towards the decision that the Supreme Court will then go on to make. Lastly, I just want to also talk about the fact that particular to the BJP and the last 5 years is that Modi sold his platform of this Gujarat model, right? Gujarat model of development in 2014. And it was used as a phrase to show the apparent gains made in the economy of the state, which research has already shown has only gone towards the 1%, towards his friends, towards the Ambanis and the Adanis, And so the Gujarat model also, of course, we must, I guess, in a way talk about it because, I guess it also includes the fact within it, the authoritarian nature of Modi's politics and his influence on institutions such as the police. It includes the multiple fake encounters that were conducted to kill Muslims selectively. It includes the displacement of Adivasis due to the construction of the Sardar Sarovar Dam in the early 2000s. So in a way, we can say that he's applied the Gujarat model successfully across the whole country, but not in the way that they were trying to sell it. And in an interview back in 2002, when he was asked about if he had any regrets about the riots, the one thing he said was, I regret the way I managed the media. And this time around, we see that a decade later, now most mainstream, what counts as mainstream news media in India is in his pockets and is completely pro-Modi. It has made it far easier to celebrate complacency with gross violations of human and environmental rights and made it far more difficult to question the government. It labels anyone criticizing the government as anti-national or as an urban Naxal, taking these cues quite often from government officials and people affiliated with the BJP and external groups such as the RSS and the broader Sangh Parivar. And I mean, the problem, of course, with indigenous rights is always that even though we have to talk about how much worse it's gotten under the BJP, it is just accelerating what was already, in place. Within our institutions, the Congress was in power when Salva Judum was created, which was this paramilitary group that worked under the police to, clear forest areas and murder indigenous people in extrajudicial killings. So the problem of thinking about development only within these confines of neoliberalism remains dominant even if we see a miracle result in the election that kicks out the BJP and brings in a more progressive coalition. As can be seen from the case in Chhattisgarh, where after the removal of BJP from power, the Congress has assumed office, and it has yet continued the same trend of granting permissions for coal mining to big corporates such as Adani. What the past 5 years have done, however, as the panelists pointed out, is that it's kind of made it okay for this authoritarianism to be carried forward, even when they are not in power. It has made it okay. It has kind of normalized this sort of authoritarian politics that even when the BJP is no longer in power, now the people, because the overall public imagination and consensus has sort of shifted towards the far right and more towards, using violence in a more, like using violence as like a first reaction, it has kind of made it okay for parties such as the Congress, now that they've come into power in Chhattisgarh, to go ahead and not seek consultations with indigenous people, even when they promised that they would do that, to not redistribute land and in fact to further increase militarization and policing. But I guess I'll end it at that because I think I'm running a bit over my time, but I look forward to hearing you guys on the discussion and some questions, so thank you.
Thanks very much, Harsh. It's time to open up the discussion to any questions that you may have.
Forgive me for starting this off, but I would like to address all of you, and particularly Navsharan and Lubna, to address the question of use of media in India, which Harsh mentioned. Modi's main concern was really managing the media, not the massacre of Muslims in Gujarat, but the management of media. Now, Navsharan, you had in your speech yesterday mentioned the University of WhatsApp University. I'd like you to elaborate on that and basically enlighten people here regarding this WhatsApp University, and also the way both you and Lubna could possibly talk to it about this, how media are being used in India for repression.
To begin with, as you said, the main concern of Modi was to manage media, which he did pretty much well. I guess a lot of thanks to his PR campaign that he came up with. It was pretty much all over the place. Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar. He got through that, and Trump is doing the same now. Ab ki baar Trump Sarkar, I've heard that. And so basically... He did say that, yeah, with a lot of edit, even in those two sentences, nonetheless. But I guess media has been the way you were saying that the way he pretty much have as he mentioned the pro Modi thing. You have people like Arnab Goswami, his mouthpieces, though Arnab says the nation wants to know. No, it's Arnab who wants the nation to know what Arnab wants them to know. So that's how basically it goes. So media, I would say that Modi did handle it very well, and the way the only way he does is, if there's someone who's speaking against him, there is he's either been silenced, or you've got these well-known journalists who've been in the field of journalism for ages now. They are quitting journalism because they no longer have faith in journalism, because everything's been censored. I mean, whatever you do, so he's just going all out and about. So now his basic tool, I believe, remains media, because that's how he reaches out to the audience. And that is his shield now. So he's pretty much protective about it, and he does not want any of the media to go against him. And if there's something that goes against him, there are stringent steps that are taken against him. It could be against the entire organization. I guess NDTV had faced that a shutdown once, if I'm not wrong. Just correct me. So basically, that's what he's going out. So if there is someone who comes against him, they've just been silenced. And the only reason why he knows very well, like he said, that he couldn't manage media back then in 2002. He wants to manage media and become, there's one very particular thing that media comes up with these days, especially post-2014. It is not the, earlier, if you remember, it was UPA government or it was NDA government. Now it's Modi Sarkar. It's the one-man show that he's trying to deal with. And all of this is the media that is doing it. He's making media say that, this is one-man show, to an extent that the guys who were responsible for the entire the Hindutva thing, Mr. Advani, these guys were sidelined simply. So it's it's not just him. It's definitely his PR and the way he's trying to handle media and trying to make them pro-Modi is what is working his way, I suppose. And talking about WhatsApp University,
WhatsApp University is actually a term coined by one of our very few journalists standing now, Ravish Kumar, and he's been saying that once. I don't have the statistics at the moment, but there is a huge machinery which BJP actually mobilized, comprising mostly of NRIs under the leadership of some very savvy people sitting in the Silicon Valley and other places who created a machinery which actually there are hundreds of people who have created these WhatsApp groups on phones and have infiltrated into every other group, and they, by the hour, they add things into the content to it, which is pure poison. Content like Muslims are, they have, all of them have multiple wives. They all have their rate of procreation so high that in next 15 years, India will be overtaken by Muslims. That they eat beef. That India was golden, and how with the advent of Muslims, that golden period ended. How they've been raping our women, and these are 99.9% are plain lies. Others are distorted facts. But they have entered the psyche of a large number of Indian people, and they made phones available. They made, these are, if one is to look at how this machinery worked, there are many ways in which this WhatsApp university, because this is creating a fake knowledge, which you were also mentioning about, that there is an ignorance which is created very systematically in a very organized way, and a lie which is told 1,000 times a day begins to get register in people's mind. On the other hand, we saw, as we were doing Karwa-e-Muhabbat, that there are hundreds of cases of hate violence which do not even get reported in the local press. There are only few who go on to be reported in the national press, and within those there are a handful counted on the fingers of both hands, which actually stay in national conscience for some time. So mainstream media has been totally decimated. Again, probably Lubna would know that there are huge monopolies. Most of the media houses the mainstream media houses are owned by their big monopolies, and Reliance happens to be Mr. Ambani's empire that's penetrated everywhere. There is intimidation, there are attacks, and there is gagging, which is happening very systematically. Ravish Kumar, who I said is one person standing, has been attacked several times, and he's been given life threats. So, and there are some other journalists also who've been given similar. So. One, that mainstream media is gagged. You can only report what Mr. Modi wants to hear. And on the other hand, there is a machinery which is feeding lies and which is feeding. So if someone says that Indian elections are fair and free, I don't know about how machines are going to be manipulated or whatever, but in terms of lies being fed uncontrollably, it's not fair. It's not fair because although what Mr. Modi now, there is no resonance for what he is saying, but he's making claims without any evidence. And people tend to believe the authority when someone like the Prime Minister says, we've killed 350 people in Balakot. I mean, we are supposed to believe him. Prime Minister must have done the homework, but this is a plain lie. And he continues to build his campaign, his governance on lies, but very systematically.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that really quickly, yeah, just the amount of lies he says, uncountable really. But I mean, One of the things that he said most recently was, to throw like a pot shot at like Rahul Gandhi. What he said was, oh, he's running from this one constituency, Wayanad. Modi said that he's running from there because it's a Muslim majority constituency. Again trying to flare up these like communal tensions and say that, oh, the Congress will only win on the Muslim vote, even though like if you just fact check it, that constituency only has 20% Muslims and the rest are Hindus. So that's kind of the thing. And in terms of just interactions with like the like Ambani, for example, for almost 6 months, I think a couple of years ago, there was this scheme for our Geo mobiles. Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to come on that. I thought I would just add
Yeah, exactly, right? Because so the Geo Mobile, which is like the internet network service that Reliance provides, which is this big news media monopoly and everything, they basically, I'm sure through some help from the government, obviously, because no massive corporation can sustain handing out 6 months of free service to tens of millions of people at once. So in this like really obvious sort of collusion that is like only hidden by like this very thin surface layer, you can see so clearly how these nexuses are sort of like involved with each other and interacting with each other. But yeah, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just wanted to add the fact that when she said that providing mobiles, it's not only providing. There was a scheme where they started off, that you could just get a mobile phone. They came up with Make in India thing where they had a big fair at BKC, Bandra Kurla complex, and that's when they started off the scheme of giving out mobiles at like a very minimal price. Believe me, there were like tons and tons of people who actually enrolled to it. And again, coming to the 6-month thing, you actually get a free 6 months of internet service. And I was pretty surprised when I came to Canada. I came to Canada last year. You pay like $45 a month and you get 4 gigabytes of data. If you are lucky. And there you get 1 GB a day. 1 GB a day. So you just calculate with the WhatsApp University. Just try to link the things. WhatsApp University, 1 GB a day. You pay just 350 rupees for 3 months. That's how it works. That's how they are trying to, just go through and penetrate into people. People are 24/7 into their phones. My brother, he spends like 1 GB every single day because it's been associated with the email. So I just get an email notification that you have used up your 95% of data today. I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. I use 4 GB a month. So that's how it goes.
Just to add also that to counter these lies, Modi has never actually faced the press and never had a press conference. So the only person he's been interviewed by is a movie star who's talked to him about how he loves mangoes. So
well, I guess he came on Arnab Goswami's thing. But again, it was Arnab Goswami, right?
So, 1 second, sorry. But we have a question at the back.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions and some motivation to it. It's heartbreaking to see this huge country going fascist. And India has a long tradition of communism. There are a lot of communists in India. There are communist governments in India. What's going to happen to them? What is their role? I mean, is there going to be, do you anticipate, or has there even been some huge pogrom against communists? I mean, we know about Muslims and Dalit, but I haven't heard much about communists being persecuted. Anybody who wants to read about it should take a look at Sujata Gidla's memoir called Ants Among Elephants. It's a family memoir going back to the 20s and 30s. She's from a Dalit Christian communist family, and it tells you a lot that the communists do not have a very good record, or at least a certain branch of communists, the Stalinist communists, do not have a very good record with respect to the Dalit issue. So I'd like people to address that. My second question is, what can we do, if anything, we here?
Sure. I mean, just very quickly, I guess. So no, that's absolutely a really great point. I think what really got the discourse about communism back into focus in India, I think, was a couple of years ago, or last year was it, when the Tripura elections happened. And finally, after 30 years of having stayed in power there, the CPIM, the Communist Party of India Marxist, was taken out of power. And instead, a BJP government was formed. And even then, of course, you saw that after the elections, actually, there was a lot of basically buying of MLAs. There was a lot of buying of MLAs from opposition parties to kind of get them to form a majority so that the BJP could have a government in that state. The first thing they did after coming to power, the very day that the election results were announced, or I think the next day, basically they bulldozed a statue of Lenin. Basically, saying that, oh, we don't need Lenin. What has he done for India, for example? Not trying to question what has the RSS ever done for India, but there's that. And then with say Kerala, it's interesting because so there are actively what is happening is that RSS and affiliated groups such as the Sanatan Sanstan people are repeatedly raided by the police and found out that they have bombs being made in their warehouses. Just recently someone just blew themselves up accidentally in creating a bomb at home because they were intending to throw that bomb at a party office of the CPI. And these are kind of repeated instances that happen a lot. CPI activists are murdered, candidates are murdered in in smaller constituencies. So this is why it kind of doesn't come up to mainstream media because it's not happening in a big city, for example. But then at the same time on the ground, I think in terms of opposition, the communists have still maintained, I think, a pretty good streak of organizing, as we can see with things like the farmers' marches that have happened over the last few years. Really, really great organizing work. Farmers walking thousands of kilometers, many on their bare feet, to bring attention to problems that they've faced. Like Navsharan has pointed out with the farmer suicide, which is an absolute crisis right now, and no attention is being paid to it. Giving waivers of 50,000 rupees, giving waivers to people who owe 50,000 rupees to the state seems to be such a big burden for them, but for some reason, hundreds of billions of rupees worth of non-performing assets that the cronies have are completely okay for the bank to, just sort of roll out. And not to get into, such a conspiracy theory mode, but I mean, a lot of people have pointed out how demonetization basically was a ploy to take money from the poorest of the poor and refund banks, essentially, because India, 90% of all transactions happen on cash, based on cash, and because in many places there are multiple villages where there is not a single bank available, so people have to travel multiple villages to go and deposit their money. So that was actually a tactic to, in fact, centralize a lot of the money that was unaccounted in banks, so that banks could stabilize themselves because the big corporate loans have not been paid off yet. But did you guys want to add anything to that?
I would say, as far as the communists is concerned in India, they are pretty much geographically centric, So they've got only pockets of places where where you've got this communist party that is pretty dominant. Unfortunately, again, as you said, they are again being bulldozed by the BJP and the sister parties that they have around. So though they are organized, they are pretty much restricted to a particular area. They are unable to kind of reach out. So there is though organized, they still have communists still have a long way to go to actually have an access through, to cover the entire geographical location of the country. So that is one a glitch as far as communism and communist parties in India is concerned. They are pretty much geographically restricted. They're just somewhere in the pockets, but they are dominant there again, especially Kerala, where you've got these people just coming over and over again. So yeah, I mean, the problem with these guys is they are pretty much geographically restricted. That's all I have to say.
Just very quickly before I pass it on, also is the fact of casteism in communist parties as well. You can see even today, not a single communist party has a leader in its upper ring that is of a lower caste. And when they're questioned about these things, they come up with the same excuses that the people they are, supposedly opposing, and who they call the bourgeoisie and the casteist Brahmin tyrannical types, they come up with the same excuses of basically saying, oh, we just see merit, and if we see someone who is like, who has the merit enough, I'm sure we will have a Dalit leader in the Communist Party. So obviously that is some place where they really need to do their homework. They need to kind of really try and transcend the internalized Brahmanism that exists within communist parties. I mean, this goes back all the way to the formation of the communist parties and the split that happened between Ambedkar and union leaders, back in the 30s. That's just a fact, unfortunately, of the way the party does its business. But yeah.
Just to add to it, that this is the story of electoral left. India also has a very strong tradition of non-electoral independent left, and that has actually been very active. All these on various fronts, on student fronts, on trade unions, farmers, women's organizations, democratic rights, rationalist societies, people she mentioned who've been murdered are actually the Bholkar, Pansare. They are all left-wing people also. So there is a tradition of independent left which is alive and kicking. And the other very important source now is students and young people who are who don't have the baggage of the old left, and they are forging new alliances. And this very interesting and important alliances were made post Rohit Vemula, the Dalit student whose institutionalized killing in the University of Hyderabad actually led to a very big mobilization of students, left-wing students, and a new slogan is born in India which is called Jai Bhim, Red Salute, and which is the first time where one is seeing the alliance of Dalit and left, and which is being led by youth, which is very, very promising. We have at the moment centers, several centers, Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University, Hyderabad, in Jadavpur University, and several smaller universities, regional universities, where youth are mobilizing on these issues and are bringing caste to the center stage, which is heartening.
Sorry, we just have 10 minutes left, and this gentleman here would like to pose a question.
Very fast, thank you. Thank you for the education, everybody. Really glad to receive it. I was wondering about the issue which seemed to be present in all three presentations of enforced ignorance, and who are the enforcers of enforced ignorance, because we have the hardline enforcers who are the lynchers, the people who go kill Gauri Lankesh, etc. But then we also have the middle class enforcers of enforced ignorance who use politeness, and they criticize you if you criticize someone's consciousness. For example, say, don't make a charge of false consciousness. But it seems that, in fact, by identifying one of the enemies as enforced ignorance, indeed, that's something we have to take on. This issue of vast numbers of people having very much a false consciousness. So how can we get people to stop enforcing ignorance? And then related to that is a time frame question, because of course there's the long-term, community building, consciousness raising, etc. But in the short term, obviously this election is done with for the most part, and we'll see the results soon enough. But in the next 5 to 10 years, avoiding re-elections of governments like the one in Uttar Pradesh with Yogi Adityanath is so essential to just giving people respite so that they're not getting killed on the ground. So how do we convince enough people, wherever we are? I'm an American with roots in India, and of course my concern is Trump in the United States for similar reasons. How do we get people to stop voting for these folks? How do we get people to stop enforcing the ignorance and have that sort of voila or come to Jesus moment? Thanks.
Why don't we collect now everything you haven't asked? Just in case there are more questions. Okay. I think it's a fundamental question. How do we wake people, get them out of their ignorance? And I think, as we've been seeing in the last 4 years, building up, the only way is to build up from and go to, there are people, we've had meetings where people have said, don't sit at home, just get out, talk to other people, people have for this election made promises like they will talk to 50 people and educate them, tell them the truths, because these need to be asked. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's big machinery, as we've said. There is, you can't take on the Reliance Jio empire. People like us, people like Hirsch and Lubna, we are nobody in front of that mighty empire. But we have our reach to wherever in little platforms that we've been building, and that's what I said, that we've been trying very hard. And today, if in the 4th phase of election, if there is news coming, which I have been reading here, that Mr. Modi's speeches have no resonance. It is because others have asked questions, and Mr. Modi has not been able to provide any evidence for. So even if his theatrics, his everything is very appealing to people, like it's plain theater with which he tries to mesmerize, and people do go with him. But any hard questions about facts, and all his claims fall flat. So counter speech, building up, I think these are difficult choices, but as we've seen in the last 4.5 years, many have come out, and many are trying to do it, and we just hope that it will pay off.
All right, as far as the enforcers are concerned, you would find these enforcers mostly related to the rural part. I mean, you've got these people who are like religiously driven. They are being used, by these right wing to, kind of execute their plans. Because as you know, India is one country that has always been divided on religions. So anything on religion sells, and it sells pretty quick. So that is one thing. And, what we could do to bring about a change, I would go by the cliche that, only time will tell, and people will definitely come to know the real face of this guy, Modi. Because believe it or not, Gujarati community was one of the most pro-Modi community after demonetization and after the GST thing. So like my father is into the garments business, and he regularly visits Surat, which was once called as the Manchester of India. So this place, they give you bills, the memos, right? Right below it, nowadays they've started writing that Hamari bhool kamal ka phool. People are realizing. I mean, so it's not something that, it will definitely take a lot of time. But, these little shocks that people are getting, the kind of, the poverty and the figures, the staggering figures that you gave in terms of unemployment, and in terms of how people are facing the big rise in prices and stuff. Definitely, there would be a time where people would realize, that, this is not the guy that you vote. Definitely they voted for development. Unfortunately, there was, if you go by figures, where is the development? I mean, it is either development at the cost of the indigenous people, or development at the cost of the middle class people. The garment industry has gone totally, it may not be completely shut, but the streets of Surat that were once being, characterized by chaos and people all around. Believe me, my dad was telling me that if you go now, it feels you like you are in a place where the people are just sitting, waiting for business to happen. There was time when it was just business. People did not even know when to drink water or have their lunch. But now it's like, it's as still as anything. So like, definitely there would be time where people would definitely come to know whom to vote for and who's the right guy to vote for.
Just a piece of statistics. 11 million jobs were lost in India in the year 17-18, 11 million. And 9.2 out of the 11 million are rural jobs, and 8.8 are women who lost jobs. And so to build, this is the kind of losses one is seeing. And the hope is that people, when they are voting or when they are thinking, they will not forget that there is no food to put at the table in the night. And there are, just talking about government, Oxfam came out with a study very recently in India. 1 in every 2 government workers in India are paid less than the minimum wage. Minimum wage, as it is a very low wage. And 1 in 2, like 50% workers are on less than minimum wage. And they estimated that it will take 941 years for a worker working on a minimum wage to make as much as the CEO of the garment factory is making in 1 year. So it's not, that's a kind of inequality, and that's a kind of crisis we are sitting over.
As for just opposition as well, the problem is that even when there are talks of uniting opposition, even when there is an anti-Modi, for example, sentiment, the problem, of course, remains configuring that within the parliamentary system, and that means, this making of this grand coalition, for example. But even there, you see fragmentations and opportunism within opposing parties that already have nothing to actually speak of. The Congress was absolutely decimated in the 2014 elections, and it still thinks it can boss around other parties that has maybe like 2 or 3 seats less than itself. If you look at what has happened in Delhi right now, is that Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party have refused to, support each other. Exactly, and refused to form a coalition. Now, what that does is, of course, split the vote down the middle, and the BJP people are still going to vote for BJP, and that just means that we've lost the capital city to opportunism from the opposition. Like the saddest thing I think about this current whole term of governance is the state of the opposition. Is the fact that despite demonetization, despite GST, despite the Rafale deal and all these things that would be, something on it's basically opposition points on a silver platter being provided to the opposition, and they still can't manage to, get them on these points, because I think we all know deep down that they just want to come in power and they want to be the ones doing the same kind of corruption, and that's kind of the unfortunate crossroads. But I mean, in terms of, I guess, counters, I think we have to look at then, I think, outside of the electoral sphere, things like there is this thing called the Jan Sarokar Manch, which is a, collective of activists who have come together to create a people's manifesto and, kind of talk about what are the real concerns this election, what should be actually talked about. And it's made by people who were also actively involved with the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which was a workers farmers collective that is a really strong activist group. At the same time, you also see companies like WhatsApp itself is actually doing street plays in India to educate people who are using WhatsApp about how to spot fake news. So it's you would not expect a private company to say that, because I'm sure they're just more than happy to get profits for Facebook with more and more usage of WhatsApp. But even WhatsApp is kind of concerned, and to, I guess, maybe keep up a social image of being conscious or whatever. They are saying that, oh, you need to make sure that you're not believing forwarded messages from your friends as real proof of things that are happening, such as the 350 figure that is just being quoted out of thin air. Anyways, I think there, I guess, smaller resistance are happening, and those are the ones that we must really look towards and hope for that they come out on top at the end of all this.
Just to conclude your question on a very funny note, there was this meme that ran around, that was just making its round during elections recently. My sister sent it to me, and it says that before you vote, close your eyes, think of the beef and the roasted beef on a very nice and spicy stuff, and then you go ahead and vote. So probably things like this would work. You just lure them that, oh, you could get beef. That's it.
Thanks, everyone. On that note, we'll conclude and give you the chance to actually enjoy the sunshine outside.